the July 17th deadline coming up, it's starting to look like either Saquan Barkley or Josh Jacobs will hold out. So if you're not aware, Josh Jacobs and Saquon Barkley were franchise tagged, which means that they are making almost $11 million for this year, and they don't really have a chance to negotiate. So the way that the franchise tag works is it takes the average of the 5 highest salaries at the position, and then that's what it pays you. And if they want to franchise you a second year, it is the previous year's contract times an additional 20%. And then if they want to tag you a third year, which almost never happens, it's multiplied by an additional 44%. But I'm sure you've all heard a lot of the star players complaining about it because they want a long-term contract.
Me out, it's my turn! You told me it was my turn!
So will Josh Jacobs or Saquon Barkley actually hold out? And the answer I personally think is no. I think both of them will eventually sign it. $10 million is a lot of money. And I think they'll sign it, get over it, and play on it. But if I had to guess out of the two who would hold out, I would say that Saquon Barkley is much more likely than Josh Jacobs to actually hold out. And there are sort of two reasons that kind of anchor my belief. The first is that Saquon Barkley has made so much more money in his career than Josh Jacobs has. Saquon Barkley has made $38 million, and Josh Jacobs has only made about $11 million in his career. So since Saquon's made like 3.5 times as much money, that means he probably has like $10 million set away, so he feels free to just hold out for the year because, you know, he's mega rich. Whereas Josh Jacobs probably only has like $1 million set aside, only $1 million, but he probably only has like $1 million set aside, so he doesn't feel as comfortable in holding out. And honestly, even if they did get a contract, it just wouldn't be that good. This year, the best contract that was given out to a running back was Miles Sanders, who signed a 4-year contract for $25 million, and he only had $13 million guaranteed. So that means the single-year franchise tag with about $11 million guaranteed is almost as much as the entire Miles Sanders contract. Now, I know, of course, you're probably saying Miles Sanders sucks compared to these two guys who are top 5 running backs, and yes, this is true, but that doesn't mean that they would get that much more money. So how much would Josh Jacobs or Saquon Barkley sign for? And it's a little complicated, we don't really know. I guess we'll find out on the 17th for sure, but the franchise tag over the next 2 years would come to about $24 million. So they definitely wouldn't sign for less than that. And a common way to calculate it is an additional 15%, which would mean that over the next 2 years they would sign for about $27 million. So if you're hearing this number and you're really update, you might think, oh, I read on Twitter that the Giants offered him $26 million over the next 2 years. But this is likely completely untrue. So Saquon Barkley tweeted 2 hats, which for the old people means that they're lying. So what likely happened was the Giants offered him $26 million over the next 2 years, but only like $15 million was guaranteed or something like that. So in all reality, they could cut him at the end of the year for like a $2 or $3 million dead cap hit. There's no way they actually offered him $26 million in guarantees and he turned it down, because that would just be a solid offer that any reasonable agent would accept. And then finally, should the Giants and the Raiders sign these players to extensions? And in my opinion, the answer is maybe, but probably not. In the current NFL, it just doesn't really make sense to pay running backs $13 or $14 million per year for multiple years. Especially not the Raiders, who suck and are probably going to win like 5 games this year. That would just be a complete waste of money. With the Giants, maybe, because they did make the playoffs last year. I don't think anyone really thinks the Giants are going to win a Super Bowl. They probably will make the playoffs, so I guess I can understand keeping them for the next 2 or 3 years. But if they could, just sign them to the franchise tag and then draft a new running back the following year. And the entire NFL just really doesn't value running backs. You can kind of see this over the past 10 years. The franchise tag amounts for almost every position has doubled, and running backs has stayed almost exactly the same. So while it doesn't sound exactly fair, and you're comparing them to these other NFL athletes who are making $10 tens and tens of millions of dollars, I still don't feel too bad for them, because they are making $10 million per year, or, you know, taking home around probably $6 million per year for playing football that a lot of people would love to do. So I'm not gonna feel too bad for them. But anyways, thanks for watching my video. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment below.